children of all ages. Stay Weird Network proudly brings you Cards Subject to Change with Hassel. That's right, peep. We got a Hart Foundation edition this week as we're going to tackle what if Owen Hart had been allowed to join WCW with the rest of his family after the Montreal Screwjob. So, for those of you that may not remember, Owen was the one person Vince did not release from his contract. He allowed Davey Boy to go. He allowed Amble to go with Bret, but he held on to Owen Hart. And I get it. I would have held on to Owen Hart too because there's a great bit of potential there. We've covered that on Card Subject to Change in our very first episode. If you hadn't seen it, go check it out. It's in the archives. But for those of you that have, you know what we could have done with Owen in the WWF. But what could we have done with Owen in WCW? The crazier fact of this whole thing is we could have had the Hart Foundation in WCW around 1992 to 93. So, fun fact for those of you that may or may not know, Owen Hart actually initially joined WCW before he went to the WWF. He had a handful of matches there on Saturday night, WCW Power, a few things of these nature, the weekend shows, the main event, all of those. But Owen had several matchups on there. He would wear very different attire than what he would have later in his career. But it was he was solid talent. He went by Owen Hart. Around the same time, the Anvil had a handful of series of matches with WCW as well. And he was almost a WCW guy there. And he was being pushed pretty well. The Bulldog signs around shortly thereafter. So, and for those that may not know, a really deep dive, Bret Hart almost signed with WCW just after his first Intercontinental Championship loss to the Mountie. So, his contract was coming due. And because his contract was coming due, he was a little worried about what they were going to do with him because he had seen what they had done with some former Intercontinental Champions in the past. Those guys that had been tag team guys and won the title, and they didn't really do a whole lot with him. He didn't want to be a matador like Tito Santana, so to speak, or Greg the Hammer Valentine. He didn't want to be rhythm and bluesing, honky. I mean, the list could go on and on and on of talent that the IC title was not a launching pad for, unfortunately. And Bret was worried about this. Now, Bret gambled, and although he almost signed with WCW, he chose to stay with Vince. I think it was due to a technicality. Actually, I think his contract rolled and he was unaware. And then by the time he had to put in notice, he knew they'd have buried him and so forth and so on. But we could have got the Hart Foundation in 92. And if you guys wanted to get me to cover that, drop me a comment below and we will cover that. But today, we're covering Owen Hart, 1998 and WCW. Let's go. So we're going to kick off right after the Montreal Screwjob. Bret Hart would debut on the Monday Nitro the week before Starcade in this universe. He would come down to the ring and, you know, the NWO had been clamoring for weeks that Bret was coming and Bret was NWO for life, etc., etc. Bret would come out and tell them he appreciated their support through his trying time, but at the end of the day, he has a family and he's not interested. Now, he has a broke hand, so he cannot debut inside the ring until Sold Out in January. But they have a good build to start right there between him and the Nature Boy, Ric Flair, for their matchup at Sold Out in January. Now, in January, it goes much like it does in the real verse. Bret defeats the Nature Boy in their rematch from their WWF Championship match. He wins, locks in the sharpshooter, cements himself as a top guy in WCW. Now we get into the fun stuff. Next night on Nitro, Eric Bischoff would interrupt Bret Hart and give him another offer to join the NWO, handing him a shirt. Bret turns it down once again, but then Eric tells him, no, you must understand, you will join the NWO. At this point, Bret would clock Eazy-E upside the head, knocking Bischoff out. He would then take the shirt, wipe his ass with it, and throw it at Eric. Now, this would bring the ire of the NWO, who would storm the ring. Bret would narrowly escape, but Bret would be cementing himself as a babyface in WCW. Now, sidebar, I'm not sure why in the hell WCW just had him as a tweener his entire time. He would be a heel 1 week, a face for a few weeks. It was just utter nonsense. But a lot of the booking in WCW at the time was. So, we're rocking with it, people. So, the next week on Nitro, Bischoff would announce that at Super Brawl, since Bret wants to take the hard road, so to speak, it's going to be Bret the Hitman Hart versus Lex Luger versus the Macho Man Randy Savage for the #1 contendership at Spring Stampede. February at Super Brawl, Bret will win his triple threat matchup. Now, this is the same night. The Sting showed up just tan enough for this match to work for Hogan, and Sting re-wins the WCW Championship after having it stripped away from him after the Starcade muddled mess. On Nitro the next night, Bret comes out to talk to the crowd, talks all about his title shot at Spring Stampede when interrupted by none other than Scott Hall. Now, Scott Hall had won the World War III back in November, setting himself up as the #1 contender, but because of the title nonsense they had, his title shot got pushed out a little while until uncensored. But Scott Hall looks at the Hitman and tells him, "I don't know why you're out here talking, Chico, because I'm the uncrowned champion, and you're not going to beat me." Well, Bret the Hitman Hart would then look at Scott Hall and tell him, "Personally, I don't care if it's you. I don't care if it's a Stinger, because at the end of the day, I'm the excellence of execution. I'm the best there is, the best there was, and the best that there ever will be." Scott Hall would say, "Well, you're so brave and you got so much machismo, Chico. How about later tonight, the Outsiders versus Sting and Bret the Hitman Hart?" Now, the Outsiders are the World Tag Team Champions at this time. They had just won the tag titles as Scott Steiner turned on Rick at Super Brawl. The next week on Nitro, we in our main event, Sting and Bret actually form a pretty damn solid tag team and do pretty well with one another. World champion looking like a world champion should. Sting is getting back in ring shape, and with the Hitman right beside him, they're doing a solid job there. Just when they're about to win, out of nowhere, the NWO. But just when it looks like they're outnumbered and outclassed, out through the crowd comes Owen, Bulldog, and Davey. And the Amble, I apologize. There ain't two Davies. Owen, Bulldog, and the Amble, Jim Neidhart, come through the crowd. They make the save, and the foundation is there. The next week on Nitro, it opens up as Bret, Owen, Bulldog, and Amble come down to the ring. Bret tells the NWO that his family has a solid foundation, and the Hart Foundation is here in WCW. And uncensored, it's going to be the Hart Foundation versus the NWO. At uncensored, 1998, the Hart Foundation versus Kevin Nash, Kurt Hennig, Rick Rude, Scott Steiner, and Kate Dog. They have a great matchup, but this is where we start to give Owen a little bit of a shine here in WCW. Owen will get the pinfall victory over K-Dog that night, giving the Hart Foundation the win and Owen the shine. But in our new universe, on this night, Scott Hall would win the WCW Championship from Sting. Now, the next night on Nitro, the NWO, they're in utter chaos with infighting. You got Scott Hall bragging about winning the title and doing what Hogan couldn't do. You got the Macho Man backing Hall up because, Hogan and Macho Man had been at it for some time. Hogan's trash talking Nash for losing to the Hart Foundation last night and telling Hall he better watch his back, brother. About this time, the Hart Foundation comes out, and Owen tells Hogan, "Bret warned you about not having a foundation in your family." Bret then tells Hall that at Spring Stampede, the title is coming to the Hart Foundation. But starting tonight, They're gonna get gold starting tonight as Owen and Davey Boy challenge the Outsiders for the World Tag Team Championship. But that's not all. Next week, Jim the Anvil Neidhart would challenge Booker T for the World Television Champion. Now later in the night, Owen and the Bulldog would do the unthinkable as they beat the Outsiders for the WCW World Tag Team titles. Now, the reason they beat them is because during the course of the match, Hogan and the Macho Man would come down to try to help the Outsiders out. But of course, they go to fight each other more than they fight the Hart Foundation. And in doing so, Hogan winds up blasting Nash upside the head, who Davey Boy scoops up and puts in a power slam for the 1, 2, 3, and new WCW Tag Team Champions, the Hart Foundation. On Nitro the next week, Jim the Anvil Neidhart will win his first and only singles championship as he wins the World Television Championship from Booker T. Now, during the course of this matchup, the NWO would come out to try to help Booker T out, not because he's one of their guys, not because Stevie Ray's with the NWO now, but they just hate the Anvil that damn much. Unfortunately, while Hogan has the ref distracted, the Disciple would go to hit Jim with the title, but accidentally hit Booker. Jim would then use his running power slam and get the 1, 2, 3 and the World Television Championship and his first singles title. At Spring Stampede, the WCW Championship, Scott Hall, the world champion, versus Bret the Hitman Hart. Now, this would start as a great and competitive matchup. And Scott Hall would look very much like a dominant champion in this right here. Scott Hall and Bret had some really great chemistry. Go back in the archives and watch some of those Razor Ramon Bret Hart matches. They're pretty damn solid. But, like always, it's WCW in 98. We got the NWO out there every 5 minutes. Hogan and the Disciple would come down to the ring. However, Macho Man and Kevin Nash, they would step in and make the save and say, not today. Not because they're trying to help them, just because they hate Hogan that damn much. They run them off to the back. Bret begins to get the advantage once again when Curt Hennig and Rick Rude would come out. However, the Anvil, Owen, and Bulldog would send them running like scouted dogs, as JR would say. Bret Hart would lock in the sharpshooter to win his first WCW World Heavyweight Championship. The pink and black confetti's coming down from the sky, and the Hart Foundation celebrate. On Nitro, the Hart Foundation stands tall to open the show, as they're all draped in gold. The NWO come out. Hall and Nash and Macho turn on the Hogan family, starting the Wolf Pack for life. The next week, the Hart Foundation looks strong for the next coming weeks. Owen and Bulldog will be fighting champions, getting wins over Harlem Heat. The Steiners, well, the Steiners aren't there. Harlem Heat, NWO, Wolfpack, some people like it. Anvil would also have a handful of title defenses as well, which is crazy to think the Anvil in this period could have actually been a pretty decent World Television Champion. Rick Martel during this time returned and had the belt for a little while. You had a solid group of veterans and young upcomers in that World Television Championship in 97, 98. Go back and watch that, people. However, on June Nitro, the Anvil would lose the World Television Championship to none other than Chris Jericho. Now, I felt like it was only karma that he do the deeds for Chris Jericho, who he fought so hard in real life to get be put in a lion tamer. But on this night, the Giant would come down there and he would KO Jim. Of course, Chris would take advantage, do a lion salt, get the 1, 2, 3, and become the new World Television Champion. Well, later in the show, it's announced that it's going to be the Hart Foundation versus NWO Hollywood at the Great American Bash. Now, at the Great American Bash, we got the Hart Foundation versus Hogan, the Giant, Scott Steiner, and Curt Hennig with Rick Rude. Now, these have a great great back and forth match. All these guys have really good chemistry with one another. Bret would go to lock Hogan into the sharpshooter when out of nowhere, Owen would blast Bret in the back of the head. Anvil is just stunned. Anvil jumps in the ring to go to hit Owen. Unfortunately, Davey clocks the Anvil at this time. Not only is Owen NWO, but so is the Bulldog. The World Tag Team Championship champions join the NWO as Owen pulls Hogan on top of the world champion, Bret Hart, and Hogan gets the dub and the win. Now, the next night on Nitro, NWO Hollywood comes down to the ring. Owen tells the world that he's tired of fighting Bret's battles. He's moving forward. He's his own man because the Black Heart has arrived. Bulldog laughs and tells everyone that Owen has a new family with Hogan. And tonight, he will win the World Television Championship, and soon Owen will take the WCW Championship from Bret the Hitman Hart and bring it home to the NWO. Later in the show, Davey would do just what Davey said he would, and Davey would win the World Television Championship from Chris Jericho. Now, we're entering into the infamous Georgia Dome episode of Nitro. Now, in our reality, this is where Goldberg was to beat Hulk Hogan for the world title. But in this reality, on this night, it is announced in June 98, Bret Hart and the Anvil, the original Hart Foundation, would face Owen and Davey for the World Tag Team Championships by J.J. Dillon. Now, this is the main event, but J.J. would say, Hogan, you've been involved in a whole lot of things. We feel like you need to get a match tonight too. So for the United States Championship later tonight, you will face the man, Goldberg. Some things, people, is just a fixed point of history, as Doctor Who would say. Hogan would lose to Bill Goldberg, and Bill Goldberg would continue his streak, continue to be the United States champion, and move on to continue to do bigger and better things. Now, I know everybody's asked, what the hell's going on with the U.S. title? Why isn't somebody going after it? Why are we focusing on the TV title? Goldberg has the U.S. Championship. I'm not touching Goldberg. He's a golden goose. WCW shouldn't have touched him. We're going to allow him to keep his streak rolling. We're going to allow him to be a dominant U.S. champion through the rest of this year. Bill Goldberg, we'll give you a little something. However, later in the night, for the World Tag Team Championships, Bret the Hitman Hart and Jim the Anvil Neidhart would win the WCW Tag Team Championships when they hit a heart attack on none other than the British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith. Now at Bash at the Beach, it would be the Hart Foundation retaining their Tag Team Championships against none other than the Wolfpack formation of Lex Luger and Kevin Nash. The Bulldog would retain his World Television Championship over Booker T later in the night as well, in a really great matchup. Booker and Bulldog could have had some great chemistry in the ring. However, in the main event, for the number one contendership to the WCW Championship, Owen Hart would beat Sting to become the new number one contender. Now, Sting and Owen, this could have been like, man, this could have really been something. Man, it's a shame we never got that, honestly. But I feel like these two would have had a great match. Owen is going to be underhanded and be the heel. Owen's going to pick up the W and become the new number one contender. On Nitro, the next night, Owen is on cloud 9, bragging that he's the man. Bret, the title is mine. Eazy-E would also announce the next week on Nitro, Hulk Hogan and the Giant would face the Hart Foundation for the World Tag Team titles. The next week on Nitro, Hogan and the Giant would win the tag team titles when Owen would hit Bret with the big gold. Now, after the match, Anvil would get injured, and they would spray him up with the NWO. August 1998. Road Wild. Bret, he's all alone. Everybody's hurt. Everybody's turned on him and everybody's left. He cuts a scathing promo on Owen for turning his back, selling his soul to Hogan, and injuring Jim the Anvil Neidhart. In the main event, Owen wins the World Heavyweight Championship in a 5-star matchup when Bulldog hits a power slam on Bret outside the ring. Owen rolls him up into the ring, hits a tombstone pile driver on him. 1, 2, 3. And new WCW champion, Owen Hart. Now, Nitro the next night, Owen and the NWO would come down to the ring and celebrate. You got black and white confetti rolling from the sky. They're on just way up there. Hulk tells Owen that he's proud of him, and he knew Owen was the #1 Hart all along. Owen thanks the Hulk and Eric Bischoff, which is crazy. Eric then runs Bret Hart down, and they tell Bret, you're going to the back of the pack. There's no automatic rematch for you. And in these days, we didn't get automatic rematches, people. I know you get like 2 months of this shit now. We didn't get it back then, thank God. Owen, oddly enough, becomes a fighting champion. I would not have expected this, but Owen is going to become a fighting champion over the next few weeks, retaining against the likes of DDP, Lex Luger, and the Hot Rod, Rowdy Roddy Piper. However, at Halloween Havoc, Owen will go on to defend the WCW Championship against none other than Big Sexy Kevin Nash. Now, Owen would bounce around and make Kevin Nash look like $1,000,000. Kevin had some of his greatest matches with people like Owen, Shawn, and Bret. So on this night, Kevin would dominate with his power. Owen would bounce all over the place, making him look like $1,000,000. Then, out of nowhere, Kevin hits the jackknife powerbomb, and just as it looks as he's about to win his first WCW championship, he's attacked by none other than Scott Hall, who then rolls Owen up over the top of Kevin, getting the 1, 2, 3, and retaining. Hall is NWO Hollywood for life. Now, we could theorize on this. Maybe he's pissed because they didn't really do much to help him keep his world title. Who knows? Back then, they flip-flopped a whole lot of people. I stuck with the theme and the flow of how WCW was. I know there's a lot of run-ins and some of this, and that's going to be questioned, and I don't blame you. It's logical. Thank you for questioning that. However, in WCW back in this time, every match was some kind of schmoz at the end with the NWO, a ref bump. It just was a mess. So we stuck with the thing. It's lazy, but we did it. NWO Nitro, November 1998. Bret Hart declares himself as an entrant in World War III. Bret wants blood tonight, however, as he challenges the Bulldog for the World Television Championship. In the main event, Bret and the champion, the British Bulldog, have a bloody matchup. Hogan and Owen try to interfere in the match, but Sting, Nash, and Luger come down and chase them off. Then, out of the crowd, we get a returning Jim the Anvil Neidhart, who comes in. Him and Bret hit the heart attack on Davey Boy, and Bret Hart is your new World Television Champion. Now, Nitro the next week, the Hart Foundation come out, and they thank the Wolfpack for the assist. Bret then says that he told Hogan he had family, and the Anvil will always have his back. That's when Jim hits his signature, yeah, baby! I love some Anvil back in the day. At World War III in November of 1998, Bret Hart would win the 3-ring battle royal circus that was World War III, becoming the new #1 contender to the WCW Championship. Now, Nitro the next night, Bret would tell Owen he's a marked man, and that title is in his crosshairs. And in Starcade, he takes everything from Owen. Now, Owen comes out with Eric Bischoff and tells Bret that he's a narcissist. He's always held Owen down into his shadow. But however, the spotlight is now on Owen and has never been brighter. They tell Bret he will not have the easy road to Starcade, however, though. And starting tonight, he will defend his World Television Championship against none other than the Great Muta. Now, people, If that don't get you excited, Bret Hart versus the Great Muta, woo. In the main event, Great Muta would win the World Television Championship from Bret the Hitman Hart as Owen blasts Bret over the back of the head with the big gold belt. Muta would then spray him with the poison mist, hitting a shining wizard on him. We throw the works at him, getting the 1, 2, 3, and new television champion, the Pearl of the Orient, the Great Muta. Now, we would have one hell of a great matchup running up into our build into Starcade out of Owen and Bret. I mean, even WCW couldn't have fumbled this, I don't think. They shouldn't have. So I think we'd have had a really great build going into Starcade. However, J.J. Dillon comes out and he throws a little something in. He throws a wrench in the NWO's plans. He tells the NWO, if anyone interferes in this matchup, Owen Hart will be stripped of the WCW Championship at Starcade. At Starcade, they would go on to have a 6-star Meltzer match. The NWO, they would come out, but Owen and Bulldog would plead with him, please stop, go, 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 go. Then they would have some up and down, some back and forth. Bret would get the advantage for a while, Owen would get the advantage for a little while. Tons of back and forth. And about the 30-minute mark, however, Bret the Hitman Hart locks little brother into the sharpshooter. He gets to tap out and the win to become your new WCW champion for the second time. Now, this would wrap up our 1998, and we're going into 99 at this point. So, there's a lot of great things that we could really, I could go down a whole nother rabbit hole, and believe me, I want to. But, I'm going to ask you, what do you think, aside from the obvious? Now, let's just say, I'm leaving WCW in a lot better shape than they left themselves. Because by following my 98 going into their 99, they did not fumble Goldberg, who they put into the world title picture way too soon. He was way too green and he wasn't ready. They didn't make this guy that's not ready carry the company. So we get to keep Goldberg and the streak intact. He's still the United States champion rolling into 99. He's got a little more seasoning to him, so to speak. And hopefully he learned a little something in our universe. So moving into the new year, we got Goldberg still undefeated. You don't get the finger poke of doom now, which was a death kiss. Obviously, like I said, Owen doesn't have his unfortunate accident. So at what point does Owen go back to the WWF? Does he wait until WCW is purchased in 2001? Or does he finish out 99 and then 2000 when things are like Vince needed stars because he had a lot of people injured and hurt at the time, including Steve Austin? What if Owen returned to the WWF in 2000? What if? You tell me what you think would happen. Drop some comments below, let me know, because remember, the card is always subject to change.